This episode of Building Sustainability is sponsored by Beavercraft wood carving tools. Beavercraft wood carving tools are now available from UK stock at great prices with free post and packing through beavercrafttools.co.uk. The Beavercraft range includes a wide selection of knives, chisels, gouges, hooks, strops and toolkits to help you carve beautifully. There are also complete kits, including wood and a pattern, that are ideal for beginners to wood carving. Find out more and shop online at beavercrafttools.co.uk and see the tools being put through their paces by searching for Beavercraft UK on YouTube. Hello and welcome to Building Sustainability Podcast. I'm your host, Jeffrey Hart, aka Jeffrey the Natural Builder. Building Sustainability consists of conversations with designers, builders, makers, dreamers and doers, exploring the wide world of sustainability in the built environment by talking to wonderful people who are doing excellent things. Hello and welcome. This is episode 52 of the Building Sustainability Podcast. First of all, I want to say a massive thank you to Philippa and Talene. They have concluded their 3-part mini-series in the bite-size episodes, talking all about their work as sustainable architects and consultants, how they got into it, how they found their perfect jobs and how they created that sustainability role, and also a little bit on how they stayed sane doing it, because it's very, very difficult to think about anything else once you really realise how important the work they're doing is. So thank you so much to both of you for that. What else is going on? It's competition time. I've got a whole load of prizes for you to win for anyone that subscribes to the Building Sustainability Patreon page. That's patreon.com/building sustainability. I get a lot of messages from people saying, oh, I've meant to become a Patreon for ages and I've only just managed now. So maybe this is the excuse you need, because there is a load of sweet prizes. Those prizes are John Mulaney, expert shrink pot maker and incredible artist. He has given 3 shrink pots, 1 big one and 2 small ones. They're very, very cute. I should say pictures of all the prizes are on Instagram, the Building Sustainability Podcast account, or Jeffrey the Natural Builder. If you're not on Instagram, Facebook, Jeffrey the Natural Builder. Who else? Dave Cockcroft. So Dave Cockcroft has given 2 spoons, 2 lovely, lovely eating spoons. They feel so good in the hand. Isla Middleton has given a print poster of summer foraging. Very, very beautiful thing. Lino cut, I believe. And then finally, Jeff Hannis has given a bowl, a beautiful field maple bowl. You hear the Tweety birds? Very nice, aren't they? Yes, so it's a whole big Treen prize kit. Yeah, it's all about nature, biophilia. I haven't stopped talking about that yet. Yeah, it's going to make you happy. So get on it. So how do you enter? First of all, this is only open for July 2021. If you're listening in the future, then I'm afraid you have missed your chance. Yeah, so just become a Patreon supporter for any amount. And yeah, you're in with a chance. So new supporters on the Patreon since the last episode. Just Matt Stoneley this week. Matt is actually an old uni friend of mine who has been listening to the podcast from the beginning. So thank you very much, Matt. I am going to leave all of the July entrants until I do the prize draw. So I'll name them all in one big go in an episode at the end of July. I feel really bad. I mean, especially bad for Matt. Sorry, Matt. But all the existing supporters, I feel bad that you're not getting to be part of this prize draw. So what I've done is I have commissioned a stunning bowl by a friend of the podcast, Flo Hamer. Anyone that's already a supporter, you are in with a chance of winning that. And if you want to go in for the big prize draw, then you can increase your existing support by a small amount, but no stress. It's up to you. As always, if you go for the higher tier, then you get a hand-carved wooden spoon from me. So you can win in all sorts of ways. Of course, on there you get all the bonus audio, all the little extra bits that don't quite make it into the finished podcast. Currently, that stands at 8.5 hours, and there is about half an hour from Sid from this episode. Obviously, you don't have to support the podcast financially. Any sharing of the episodes is massively appreciated. Do try and tag in Jeffrey the Natural Builder or Building Sustainability Podcast. And so, yeah, we love to see it getting spread around. Okay, other news. Those who enjoyed the Nick Hayes episode, there is an event happening on the 24th of July 2021 on the Sussex Downs. There's talks and a picnic and lots of interesting stuff going on about land rights and ecology. So get yourself down to there. I'll be there. I think there's a few other building sustainability guests who are going to be there, so come down and meet those. What else? Earth floors. I've got a couple of earth floors going in the next few weeks, which is good news. Always good news to get more earth floors down. Happily, these two are in, I think one's a 1970s house. There's a little extension going on the back. So that's really good to be diversifying the range of houses that earth floors are being in. And the other one is super exciting. It's a brand new house from one of the big volume house builders, and the client has chosen to put an earth floor in the kitchen there. So I'm really excited for that. Interesting place for an earth floor to go. It's not just hippie homes, you know. What else to say? Oh, I guess a little tiny house update is that this week I took it all apart because I wanted to make some changes to the base and how it connects to the frame. So down it came, changes were made, and now it is back up standing tall again. It's all framed up to the ridge. Rain has stopped play today, but tomorrow I will be getting on putting up the rafters. So that's quite exciting. I'm hoping to get the roof on pretty quickly so that I can stop faffing around with tarps, because tarps are boring. Exciting stuff too. I've ordered my cork cladding. This is a cork insulation board, which is also facade grade, meaning that it's weatherproof. So it's vapor permeable and all that good stuff. And it's going to be the rain screen on the outside of the building. So my house will look like tree bark. That's nice, isn't it? I've been reading quite a bit into cork because of this process, and I find it just a wonder material. It's from the Quercus suber, which is the cork oak. It grows predominantly in sort of southern Europe and northern Africa, and the cork is actually the tree's bark, and every 9 years it can be harvested without harming the tree. So all the tree roots and associated soil health stay intact, and the trees can live for hundreds of years. So I think that makes it an infinite resource. I've been struggling with the idea of finite and infinite recently, but I'm pretty sure that if it grows on trees, as the saying goes, then it probably is infinite. Anyway, I digress. Let's talk about Sid Hill. So I was really, really pleased to get to chat to Sid. I've been following his work on Instagram for a few years, actually since I did a show garden. So Sid is an ecological garden designer. The tagline on his website is "Tending to the land to create beautiful, abundant and thoughtful places." Sounds nice, doesn't it? I'll just read you the offering on his website as well. He says, "Creation of ecological gardens and landscapes based on the principles and philosophy of permaculture, tending the land to create beautiful, abundant and thoughtful places for people and wildlife." Yes, that's what we need. So Sid is currently roaming the Italian landscape, living in a van, doing lots of biking, and I think he's working on the landscape out there. But he's normally found in Cornwall. It was, really, really great to meet Sid. I'm looking forward to meeting him in person and welcoming him to my home here in Exmoor. I should say that links to all of Sid's social media and websites are all in the show notes. He's got loads of great videos that you should check out, and that's it. That's all I've got to say. He can speak for the rest and tell you his fascinating story of where he's come from and how he's ended up where he is. Okay, enjoy the episode.
My route into landscape design and landscaping and the sort of regenerative fields is one from permaculture. I was home educated, and instead of learning academic subjects, I learned about permaculture. I grew up on a small holding where we grew a lot of our own food, lived off grid, built our house, had like really incredible ecological landscapes that were producing food for us. So instead of spending my time in a classroom, I was out in the landscape learning how to process food, building our house, and learning really practical skills on how to live. And when I came to an age ready to go to college, I quickly found out you couldn't do this at college.
Yeah.
I had to try to design my education down a permaculture route, but there was no academic way to study permaculture at college and at university. So instead of studying permaculture, I went into horticulture and landscape design, whereas I've actually throughout my life, I've really been interested in the broad subject of sustainable living and regenerative practices. But the reason I went down the route of landscape design is because within the field of landscape design, I can follow all of these different routes of sustainability that I like. Because as a designer and one of landscape, that includes the biological sciences and ecology, hydrology, geology, building, social sciences, art, soil science. It includes so much stuff. So what I found was this was a means I could explore all of these different subjects in sustainability and regenerative practices within my work. And there was not really anything else I could find that could encompass all of these different areas I was passionate about. So that's really how I came to landscape design. But I'm fascinated in sustainable building practices. I spent 2 months in Slovakia learning about sustainable building. I've been on the different projects. So when I say I give myself like lots of different titles, I can never really make up my mind because I'm really a avid and passionate learner and just want to learn as much as I can about how we can live on the landscape and on this planet as sustainably and regeneratively as possible.
Excellent. I'm intrigued to know how you found like your college courses. That must have been like quite well. What I imagine is there was quite a lot of ideas that probably butted up against like the permaculture thinking ways of doing things.
Definitely. I found it quite difficult, especially coming from growing up as being home educated. My parents' philosophy of education was one of allowing us kids to find our love for learning and find our interests, and then to support us along that route. So they didn't actually ever force anything on me. They didn't tell me how to learn. They didn't tell me to do much, really. They allowed me to find what I was passionate about. Whereas in most academic fields and education, it's very much telling the student or putting them in these boxes of what they can learn and what they can do. And I found that very difficult. I wanted to definitely didn't fit in that box very well, but I actually did quite well in academia.
Yeah.
And I ended up, I did college for 3 years, and then I went on to study ethnobotany on a foundation degree, which ethnobotany is the study of useful plants and human culture. So really looking at how we use plants and how that shapes who we are. And in that time, I was particularly interested in indigenous horticultural cultures, people who live with their surrounding environment and tend it, rather than in agriculture we often dominate the environment around us. Whereas horticultural cultures, they actually tend to work with ecology to tend the wild. And then after spending 2 years studying ethnobotany, I went on to the Eden Project to study 2 years of landscape design, which I found landscape design was much more open to permaculture and open to allow me the flexibility to explore the things I really wanted to learn about, because I found that science is quite rigid, whereas when you go and study the arts, that's much more flexible for you to explore your ideas. And in this 2 years, the study was really it was project based. So I was designing projects and then having tutor support through that, so I could choose what I wanted to. So, for example, for my dissertation, I did a study on how parks can be as beneficial to people in the environment as possible. So in that, I was looking at how they could bring in the community. So having a community garden with community space where people could come in and take ownership over a bed or do workshops, a community cafe, which I was looking at how to make that a very welcoming environment. And then also looking at things like phytoremediation, taking the water from the surrounding roads and filtering them through the plantings in the park, rather than what we'll pretend to do. As I'm sure you know, so much of our built landscape is we've had this engineering approach to water for quite some time, which is actually trying to deflect it off of the landscape as quickly as possible, with this theory that it's going to stop flooding, when actually it's just pushing the issue downstream and pushing the pollutants downstream, which actually it's the biology and the wetlands that slow that water down, filter out pollutants, and reduce downhill flooding. So in this park I was designing, I was looking at how we can create these beautiful long-term plantings, but they're also filtering out pollutants.
Nice. I've been thinking about that quite a lot. Where I live is in a valley, and there's a sort of track road which comes down the hill, and it rained really heavily a couple of days ago, and I drove out and it was just a whole river flooding down, and there's all sort of erosion when it hits the sort of tarmacked bit at the bottom. And I was thinking, like, how, what can I do? Where can I dig a series of ponds and just divert water out of that sort of stream that's coming down? Yeah. And like, what can I do to slow it down and like be the beaver in the sort of beaverless part of the world?
Exactly. Biomimicry.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's the interesting thing as well, is so much of the time in the past we've looked for these big engineering projects to resolve some of these issues, whereas I think there's a lot of light coming on micro solutions, small scale solutions, which on the macro make a huge impact when scaled up. So like in water catchment and flood mitigation, it's actually far more effective to create lots of micro water catchment systems than it is to create large ones, because all of them together is how the landscape has evolved over millions of years, with such things as beavers, slowing down the flow, capturing any sediment, capturing any pollutants. And so going back to my discussion on university, so I was trying to shape my study to encompass permaculture, but without actually having the title of I've got a degree in permaculture design. So looking at, so I did ethnobotany, which is the study of useful plants, and then I did landscape design. And so that when I graduated, which is 4 years ago now, my ideas was to create a landscape design and build company that specializes in creating multifunctional landscapes. And in that is because since I was a child and looking at a lot of the permaculture landscapes people were creating, is when you look close at them, they were incredible, the detail of functions and regenerative practices involved. But so much of the time, they lack the beauty, the aesthetics, and the wow factor in them, so that whoever saw that landscape and they weren't already converted, already had the permaculture lens, they would see it as sort of a mess. So I really thought there was a missing opportunity there, in that actually if we were creating these permacultural landscapes that produce food, capture and store water, filter pollutants, and look really beautiful, that will capture people's imagination through the beauty. And then once they look closely and you talk about the details, they then become inspired by the aesthetic sustainability or regeneration. And this is what I found so much in my work, is like people really value a beautiful image of something, and that's usually what captures their imagination. When I was starting out on social media, I was sharing these really interesting pictures of, let's say, edible forest gardens or some sort of regenerative practices, and they wouldn't get many likes. And then I remember I created a wildflower meadow, and I took a picture, and they almost go viral. People love it, people share it, and it's because of the aesthetics in it. So I just thought that was such a key aspect of how we can use the arts to inspire people for a regenerative future.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic, and that feels like it's sort of the landscape version of what I'm doing with building, in that it's almost like sneaking the good stuff in the back door. It's like I try and create buildings which don't look like that Hobbit, permaculture style, which a lot of people absolutely love, but a lot of people, I think, they see it as a barrier, like they can't get past that aesthetic. And so by creating for me, a home that's quite conventional looking, but made of these super incredible natural materials, I can just say that's a home. By the way, it's doing all these incredible things. I've hooked you in. So yeah, I feel like we're approaching the issue in the same way.
Yeah. So now I've been, for the last 4 years, been running my landscape design and build company. And yeah, it's gone very well. I've done some interesting projects, and I'm sort of coming to now mainly specializing in plantings, because what I found is when you start a business, there's a lot of sort of influence to carry on building a business, offer all of the services you can, employ people, carry on growing, get bigger and bigger. And what I've found is that, yeah, it's good for business, but does that cultivate a good health, happiness, or community for the people in the business? Most often I find it doesn't. And the pattern I've seen in so many people is that when they start becoming economically successful in business, quite often that sacrifices their happiness and their friendships, their health.
And their morals sometimes.
Exactly. Quite often, yeah, what is good for business isn't good for all of these other things. And it's a big pressure in our culture. I constantly battle with myself, feeling like I should be taking on more work, taking on bigger jobs, employing people. And it even comes up in your conversations a lot. Like what I find a lot when I'm talking to loved ones or friends, they say, Sid, now you're doing so well, surely you can take your hands off the tools. You can just manage people. And well, I'm not sure that's going to make me that happy. I actually started this because I'm passionate about creating things. And then, like what I think you said you experienced, is then you're not creating things, you're just managing people. Mm-hmm. So what I'm trying to do now, and over the last 2 years, my business has done very well. So this summer, I'm taking 3 months off, and I'm touring around Italy, exploring wild landscapes, bike packing, doing a bit of the van life. And the idea is hopefully it will knock my business back a bit so that I don't have so much pressure, and people expect that I'm not just a business. I'm a human being, and I need my time.
Yeah, I think that works well with the autoresponder idea.
Yeah. I do think having an auto response, always saying you're out in the landscape or out in the garden, and you'll get back to in due course, is a wise move. And I think people's perception of business is changing, and their values of what a business is, because people have been sold this face of corporations for so long that people don't buy into that so much anymore. They want to know the story and the individuals behind the business. And I think my take on that is, because people are buying into the story behind the business and the actual face and individual, I think they're now coming on to more the point that behind a business, it's just an individual. If they don't respond straight away, if they maybe start at 10 o'clock, or whatever they do for their individual happiness is more acceptable. And what I do, because I'm not the quickest at responding, but I'm a gardener. I'm out in the landscape. I'm not a admin worker. That's not my specialty. So I straight away, when I start the relationship with clients, is I usually say to them, look, I might not respond straight away, but if it's something important, get back to me and I will respond. And I feel like people are much more accepting to this now, whereas a few years ago, maybe if a business doesn't respond straight away, people get very impatient, and it's like, what are they doing? They're obviously not very professional.
Well, I think, yeah, there's definitely, well, it seems like there's two tracks. There's like the mega conglomerate type businesses, which they're going completely the opposite way, and we're open all the time doing all of this. And then there's that sort of niche, like cottage industry type, where the people that like that really like to know the story. They like to know that they're dealing with real humans, people that are knowledgeable and excited about the thing, rather than just paying their wage.
Definitely, and that's the sort of clients I take on.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. Then I want to know, like, what sort of people your clients are.
So my sort of clients are people who really want to do something quite radical with their landscape, and they want to make a difference. They want to put their money into the landscape around them to increase their sustainability and to have a bit of an impact, because gardens are a bit overlooked, and people think by growing some of their own food in their garden that it's not going to have a huge impact on, let's say, climate change or environmental pollution, or all of these big words, which actually it can have a huge impact. Just by growing a small amount of your own food in your garden is a radical act, because of the huge chain of negative impacts which food causes. Because when even if you were to grow a small amount of vegetables in your garden, that's cutting out the cultivation in somewhere like Kenya or some country thousands of miles away, where they're using their resources to cultivate food, which then it needs to be packaged, transported, sprayed with hormones to keep its shelf life, then usually unwrapped, packaged again, transported to a supermarket. Then you travel to that supermarket, buy the food, travel home, unwrap it, cook it, and all of this process, which that means that even a small amount of food has a huge impact. And so people quite often think, by putting in, let's say, a rainwater catchment system in my garden, that's not going to have that much impact. Whereas actually, when you're talking about the landscape industry, which is a huge industry with a massive coverage and impact, if people are doing these regenerative practices, like what we got onto earlier about the micro water catchment, it can have such an influence on the environment and culture. And that's really where my work comes in it, is that in the landscape industry, unfortunately, most of the people building landscapes are, I will say it, builders. but actually, when you're creating a landscape, it's not just about the physical materials, but it's also about the biology, the ecology, the hydrology. It encompasses so much that, unfortunately, most of the landscapers throughout the UK, and I'm sure throughout the world, are not trained enough to actually implement regenerative practices. Whereas a lot of them it can be quite simple but it just takes the initial research, and that's why a lot of what I'm trying to do now with my online presence is to inspire people to make the change. Because things like a rain garden isn't that complicated to implement. But unless you put the time in to do the research, you might not even hear about it.
So tell me what is a rain garden?
So much of the time when people are constructing their houses, the water from the roof is not utilised on site. It's usually either sent away and sometimes even into the sewage works, or what I've regularly seen is the water coming down the downspout and straight into the soil at the foundations of the house, which you might be in a better position to advise on this, but from my understanding, over the years, this can actually destabilize the foundations and cause issues with damp. Because you think in a lot of the parts of the UK, there is around 1 meter a year of rainfall. I mean, say 60, what's the square meterage of an average roof?
I don't know, maybe sort of 70, 80 square meters.
70, 80 square meters, yeah. So even sometimes some of the houses I work on, half of the roof is, say, 60 square meters. And so let's say 100 square meters. So that means every year there could be 100,000 litres water coming off of your roof. That's a lot of water. And quite often that can come down really quickly in a big downpour, which then sends that water off of your site into the surrounding landscape and potentially causing downhill flooding. That could be picking up sediment on its route, pollutants, going straight into rivers, causing eutrophication and pollution in the rivers, which eutrophication is a build-up of nutrients in waterways, which then causes algae blooms and can quite often kill off a lot of the life. And so this can be quite a serious issue of all of this water running off of our landscape, especially when you consider how built up the UK is. It's hard to look at a view without seeing houses. And that means that we've got millions of houses all sending the water off of their site quickly. Whereas actually, when you have a garden space, you can soak that water into your landscape, water your plants and catch any sediment before it runs off of your landscape. So what a rain garden is it's taking the water from your roof going down your gutters and capturing it in a depression. So you pretty much dig a large hole around a foot deep and you divert any of the water coming off the roof into that catchment system. And then if you have large amounts of water coming off the roof, if you've got a big house and you've got a small space, you can also create a bit of a French drain in that. And then you plant sort of marginal plants. So this rain garden then in the summer becomes quite dry, and in the winter it becomes wet. So this variety of conditions quite often enables a planting, quite an interesting and diverse sort of bog dry habitat planting, which these habitats have been lost throughout our landscape in the UK because for one, we don't have beavers anymore. That was long gone. And two, most of our landscape we drain and we divert the water off rapidly. So that means that we've got dry landscapes and we don't have all of these micro water catchments, whereas these micro water catchments are incredibly important for wildlife. So that means that just by we're taking a problem of flooding, eutrophication and pollution and wastewater treatment, and we're capturing that on our site, filtering it, watering plants. We could even be producing food as well, because there's no reason these rain gardens on our site can't be planted with edible plants. Things like Persicaria bistorta, a great perennial vegetable and salad crop, and that actually thrives in these wet and dry conditions. And then so we're supporting plants and ourselves from what is could be a serious issue.
Fantastic. I feel like we got well off a route then, but I can't remember where we'd gone before I asked you the question on rain gardens. Well, I mean, one of the things I definitely want to ask you about is edible ecosystems. And I'm particularly excited by your edible meadow. Can you tell us what that's all about?
Yeah, so where I hinted earlier that I grew up on a small holding, and I didn't hint, I did tell a bit of a story about it. And on that small holding, we had an edible forest garden, which an edible forest garden it takes inspiration and methods from indigenous cultures, particularly in tropical climates, where they would practice a slash and burn agriculture, where they would slash parts of the rainforest down, burn the material, and then they would transplant the desirable plants they want, what produce food, medicine, fiber, and they would plant those in a forest-type planting with small trees, shrubs, perennials, and then they would allow that to grow up. And as that matures, they then created an edible forest garden, which mimics the structure and habits of a woodland, which so much of the cultivation we do today is fighting against plant ecology, in that in a lot of our food systems, we grow annuals, which annuals are at the start of succession. So they are very early on, like pioneers of broken ground. But because it's at the start of a succession of ecology, and I'm a little bit off piece, but I can't explain this without saying what succession is from when ground is disturbed, it is then going along a route of succession, trying to get to woodland. And in that succession, there's different things that create a disturbance to keep it at that level of succession. So we have, at the start, we have disturbed ground, and then we have annuals coming in. Then we have perennials and grasses and small shrubs. And as it goes on, it gets to woodland. And then quite often there's a disturbance that brings it back to either grassland or meadow or annuals.
And that might be like a forest fire or something like that, some sort of big event that happens naturally, sort of periodically.
Yeah, landslide, or most of it was likely to happen from large herbivores at once upon a time, elephants and things. Uh-huh. Elephants are very good at bringing down trees and creating new grasslands. And then there has to be a disturbance to keep it at that level usually. So that disturbance might be environmental, it might be the nutrients in the soil or lack of water, or it could be from disturbance, people, herbivores grazing. And much of our agriculture is based on very early succession using annuals and pioneers. So to keep it right at the start of succession, we have to put a lot of energy in to fight any other plants. which are trying to get to further down the successional stages. And not only this, but we usually cultivate in monocultures, a single plant growing in a given area. That's not how plants have evolved. Plants are social beings, and they grow together in close-knit communities. So, since I was a child, I grew up with an edible forest garden, an edible garden that mimics the structure and habits of a forest. And since then, I've been completely inspired by edible forest gardening and permaculture. And then when I went to university, I started learning about the academic subject of design plant communities and what they're really doing at universities, and particularly like Sheffield University. They're leading the way with how we can design plantings which are ecologically diverse, beautiful, and function like a wild plant community. And they're really leading the way with their research into that. Whereas what I found was permaculture and edible forest garden weren't really utilizing a lot of this very new science and these new findings. And I was looking at these ecological plantings that they were creating, which were incredibly beautiful. They were ecologically diverse, low maintenance. But for me, I saw an opportunity in that to add in that permaculture twist and to create these plantings, but also use edible and useful plants from around the world. So that's been developing. Now, what I'm doing is there's been quite a lot of input into edible forest gardens now, but my research, I'm interested in edible ecosystems. So edible meadows, edible bogs, edible woodlands, scrublands, and over the last 5 years, I've been particularly focused on edible meadows, because what we find is many of the horticultural perennials we use in our ornamental gardens, lots of them have edible uses. But yeah, it might be that we need to learn how to use them. But what I've been doing is I've been taking all of these beautiful and edible plants from around the world, which are found in wildflower meadows, and then combining them together to create a seed mix that we can scatter to create a beautiful, biodiverse meadow with an abundance of different edible crops, and that's low maintenance. Because most meadows, the intention is you do one or multiple cutbacks a year, and then you do some weeding. So over the last 2 years, I've been experimenting with it and combining 30 different edible species, having really beautiful garden plantings from it that are low maintenance. And last summer, I harvested a salad of 18 different species from an edible meadow.
Fantastic.
So yeah, the research is going well.
Nice. I mean, that sounds utterly fantastic. I live in a sort of in this little clearing, and I've been noticing how if I scythe, then I don't get any of the the nice flowers. I don't get any of the sort of pollinators coming in. And then next to that, I'm growing my veg garden, and to think that I could just I could add in an edible meadow and have that be part of my veg garden.
What I found is it does require quite a lot of skill. I'm being realistic about this, because initially I had these quite utopian ideas that we could be covering all of our landscape with these, and in reality it takes quite a lot of skill and botanical knowledge to know what to use. Mm-hmm. So I've been creating these meadows now for a couple of years, and when most people look at them, well, it's quite overwhelming having like 30 different types of edible plants all intermingled together. And actually, what you either need to be a avid like chef and plant or food enthusiast, or it just takes a long time to learn plant by plant. But in this approach, it's like foraging. And there's this, even in our native species, when you look at a wildflower meadow, there are so many different edible and useful plants that are incredibly nutritious and good crops if you know how to cook with them. And the more my research develops, is I've realized that wildflower meadows have been an intrinsic part of our culture here in the UK for like thousands of years. We've been wild harvesting the plants. We've been grazing. We've been using the plants from meadows for medicine and crafts and dye. And lots of this has been forgotten. With my research, what I've found is there's a culture in Vancouver, Canada, that for thousands of years they have been cultivating wildflower meadows for camassia bulbs. And camassia bulbs are a high starch bulb that can be used much like a potato after a longer cooking. And this was actually a staple crop for them. And when you look at these camassia meadows, they're incredibly beautiful. And what I found is, because edible forest gardening and sort of tending woodlands for our sustenance is quite a well-researched and documented practice from indigenous cultures around the world, whereas edible meadows and cultivating wildflower meadows isn't very much documented. And I believe a part of that is about the time scales involved, because if you leave a wildflower meadow without the disturbance, it turns to woodland quite quickly. If you leave a woodland without disturbance, it can go on for hundreds of years. And so I believe that many of the practices of cultivating wildflower meadows for our sustenance have been lost through the generations. And I really want to revive that, because I think there's a lot of potential in cultivating these diverse, herbaceous vegetations for our food and medicine.
Great. I want to go on your seed mix.
Yeah, I've had a lot of people contacting me, but it's not quite ready for distribution.
Great.
So I'm still researching it, and it's quite a complicated thing. But I do offer design and consultancy. So as long as it's going to be like ongoing support, because if I just sell someone a seed mix, then it can be, if it doesn't go well, and that they don't know how to manage it, it can then, I'm sort of liable.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's a consultancy work and I'm working with them to tend it, but that's an offering I do offer, because then we can work together to resolve any issues. And the thing is with wildflower meadows is they can, in the first few years, if you don't jump in if there's a problem early on, then it can be sort of the failure of the whole composition.
Yeah, nice. I've got a similar thing going on with earth floors at the moment. People are asking me to give them a pre-packaged mix, and it's like, well, you know, if that fails in some way because of your installation, you're going to say it's my product. I don't even want to get into that. But anyway, that's an aside. So the meadows thing I think is really interesting. So I've seen a few things recently, like of people buying up fields and turning them into meadows. And then like this whole thing about not mowing motorway verges and letting them kind of, thrive a bit more. Well, first of all, when did we sort of lose this sort of the meadows, and what do you think's like bringing it back?
Well, it's only, we mainly lost it over the last 100 years as agriculture has become very mechanized and people have moved off of the landscape, because now agriculture is so successful based on fossil fuels and large machinery that, and also synthetic fertilizers, you can get multiple crops a year from your field of grass, and then they seed it with really vigorous grasses, usually use fertilizers, which then that actually pushes out the wildflowers. Wildflowers like quite hard conditions, and they tend to be pushed out in these higher nutrient systems, because grass takes the nutrients and it's very vigorous, and it pushes out the sensitive wildflowers. But also that regime of cutting, like 4 times a year or 3 times a year, that a lot of wildflowers can't do their life cycle and go to seed. And what was the other question, sorry?
It was just about, I guess, I mean, I think the answer is pretty obvious, but why do you think there's a resurgence in it?
Yeah, I've definitely seen, because I've been sort of involved in sustainability and regenerative practices for quite a few years now, since I was a kid, really. And over the last about 3 to 4 years, I've really seen a shift in people's thinking. Now, almost anyone I tell about what I do is inspired by it and is interested. Whereas you go back like 4 years ago, and it was more niche. People who weren't as interested as they are now. So this surge of people being interested in environment and sustainability, and particularly, like I was saying earlier about wildflowers, is that aesthetics. When people see wildflowers, it inspires them, and they go, "Oh wow, that's so beautiful!" And it's really good for wildlife, and it's really good for mental health, because flowers improve your happiness and feelings. So I think it's just this transitional shift in thinking at the moment, and I'm hoping it's carry on getting bigger and bigger. Interesting as well, actually. I wouldn't mind just touching on some of the like building methods as well, what I've been implementing.
Yeah, please.
And because I find sustainable building incredibly fascinating, but I do struggle professionally to offer it, because it's such craftsmanship, and it takes so much thinking and planning, and a lot of that it's hard to fit that into a business model, because when someone sees something by spoke and creative, it's like, how do you put a figure on that? How do you put a figure on how much planning you're going to be putting into that? How do you put a figure on how much thinking you're going to be doing for weeks on end, thinking about how it's going to work? Because it's very easy in business just to fit everything into square boxes and modularize it and simplify it. But when you're talking about, like, for example, one of the paths I did, I got Cornish slate, and I cut it into small strips, and then I bedded it in with a soil cement. So I was trying to minimize any use of external materials. So I mean, soil, I had it on site from the excavations of the path. So, and then mixing that 1 to 6 cement to soil, I then binded all of the stone together with that, and it's worked really well. And what I then did was covered all of the joints in a moss solution, so that moss would grow in the cracks on this sort of very strong soil cement. What's it called? Soilcrete. That's what it's coined as. But I'd be interested in looking more into using lime as well.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my my comment, was that lime and subsoil have a really, like, they really work well together. Like, they sort of bring out the best in each other. My understanding is that soil, or sort of earth, and cement, they actually kind of don't play so well together. But yeah, I mean, if you can switch out and put lime in, then you've got a recyclable material that's, you know, capturing carbon. Well, it's capturing its own carbon in its creation. Yeah, that would be the next step.
Definitely, and that's the thing, is what, like, I'm trying to minimize the carbon input of my landscapes, and so much of the landscape industry just covers landscapes in cement, and the building industry as well, and it is the I remember reading something saying that if cement was a country, it would have the highest energy use out of all countries on the planet. And so that and also the problem is with it is it's quite a dirty business in their lobbying of governments to create huge concrete works, huge construction works, what use phenomenal amounts of energy and are quite often completely unnecessary. So it's not an industry I want to
like HS2.
Yeah, like HS2. And so on what I'm practicing now a lot is actually creating paving on a flexible base of like grit. But I'd be very interested in using lime and soil, but my only concern is it getting wet.
Yeah. But so I guess my next question is about just sort of trends, and I guess influencing trends. Like we seem to be in this stage at the moment where neat and tidy is, that's the aesthetic that people want from their outside spaces, whether that's parks or their gardens. And how we can like change that to be, this sort of more not scruffy, but real things that are growing, letting them grow, and sort of introducing like real diversity rather than like the sort of barren grassland. How do you think we can do that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that, and I think that's where design comes in so beautifully. Is that then if we are to design spaces intentionally to be regenerative and sustainable, but to apply aesthetic design theory so they appeal to diverse range of people. So doing things, for example, like if you have a very wild space, or if you have a very rustic design in a building or construction, to have an orderly frame around it. So in the landscape, an example of that is having a wildflower meadow with a neat cut lawn or path next to it. And that quickly opens that up for a wide range of people to be inspired by it and to find it beautiful. And this is it's an interesting area as well, that because as a designer, what I've observed is, once again, there's this like spectrum of people, and on one end there's people who like very ecological and wild places, and that's me. I mean, if people saw my garden, they would be like, "Sid, what's going on here? You're multi-award winning landscape designer, you've got a garden full of weeds. What's going on here, Sid? This is ridiculous." So on one end you have me, who likes really wild and untamely gardens, and then on the other end you have someone who likes their manicured outdoor space, which brings the indoors outdoors, and they hoover their lawn because it's plastic. And so you have this spectrum, and for me, it's interesting working with a wide range of people and assessing right from the start where they are on that spectrum. So then you can tie in the diversity and the wild as much as you can. So, for example, I created a wildflower meadow for a client, and in the winter, wildflower meadows can look quite messy, and I always try to encourage people to keep the dead material for as long as possible. So I put in some evergreen and quite contrasting colours so that they could accept that in the winter, accept the messiness more. And that's really how I see design coming into and promoting sustainability so beautifully, design and art.
Oh, mate, yeah, perfect. I wanted to say, I want you to tell us about your bike for getting to work.
Yeah. So for quite a few years now, I've been really struggling with my means of transport, because I practice sustainability in all parts of my life as much as I can, and it's what I'm passionate about. But yet doing like 10,000 miles a year in my van just didn't sit right with me. And living down in Cornwall, the logistics of having an electric van just doesn't work. just doesn't add up. And the cost of it, and this idea of me living cheaper. So I've been really passionate in following the cycling gardeners sort of movement, where gardeners run their gardening business from a bike. And I've been, just, you know how you do when you get these ideas, you just get a bit obsessed with looking into them. And in the spring, with COVID and everything, I decided that I was getting an electric bike, and I bought a electric cargo bike, which once again, that the way I saw it is it puts a limiter on an aspect of my business, because when you've got a van, it's very easy to say, oh yeah, I'll take on that job an hour's drive away. Oh yeah, I'll take on that job, which isn't something I usually do, and I'll buy new big tools. It's very easy for every time you go to each job to carry your whole tool collection with you, because it's subsidized by fossil fuels. But when you then get an electric bike, and over the last since the spring really, or probably a bit before spring, late winter, I've had this electric bike which has put a limiter on how far the clients are away from me that I take on, and it's meant I've had a complete reassessment of my tool collection, and I'm being much more conscious about what it is I take with me. What am I actually doing that day? What tools am I actually going to need? Just taking those tools, and as soon as you get on the bike, you realise, wow, I had that shovel, and it's like 3.5 kilos, and it was complete solid steel. and then as soon as you get on the bike, you realise that all of those tools you were carrying around, which are super heavy, actually, they weren't even necessary. But I haven't completely converted yet, because my business is still based on the model of vehicles. But it's becoming a large part of my business, and going forward, I'm going to carry on transitioning. But it would have been crazy for me just to say, right, I'm now just a bicycle, just going to run my business from a bicycle, because it would have meant that I wouldn't have been able to carry on so many of the jobs. But I mean, when you go to work on a bicycle, it's a beautiful start to the day. And going back to this whole thing of being intentional, what I find is I might be running late with the van. I'm running late, and I quickly jump in the van, and I might drive faster to get to work. And then I get to work, and I'm still feeling like I'm driving fast and rushed. Whereas when I'm on the bike, I'm running late, I'm in a rush, I get on the bike, I start cycling, and then I forget about that, and I'm looking at the view. I'm stopping to look at some plants in the hedgerow. I get to work, and I'm super peaceful. And what that's also another aspect of that is I've gone down to 6-hour days, because I want an hour before work and an hour after work for transport in my vehicle. And the thing is with physical work is anyone who does more like 8 or more hours doing a physical job is damaging their body. You can't sustain that for long periods of time. You are going to damage yourself. And I've taken that on board now, and now 6-hour days, beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
You're an absolute inspiration. How can you be so onto this so soon? I've gone through the destroying myself bit, and now I'm starting to like, oh yeah, this is how we should work. So all right, I've got one last question for you, because we are overrunning a little bit, but just what do you think people can do to, like, say if someone's got a little balcony or they've got a little garden, or what do you think the thing with like the biggest impact they could do for their little space?
Get some fruit bushes.
Yeah.
Get a blueberry, blackcurrants, elderberry, because so many of the berry bushes are low input, high impact, in that you plant a let's say a blackcurrant, and that carries on growing from year to year, takes very little management, and it produces super nutritional berries. And I mean, there's a whole discussion in itself in our food system, and the incredibly poor quality of almost all of the vegetables we consume from shops, grown on nutrient poor soil, bred to be bred to be aesthetically pleasing and high shelf life, which sacrifices the nutrients. And so actually, by growing even a small quantity of berries in a non-cultivated sort of indigenous soil, having those berries each year is it's incredible for your health. I remember when I was a teenager, my mum had about 6 blackcurrant bushes in our garden in the UK. I grew up on a small holding and with my mum in like a cottage in Devon, and at my mum's place we had about 6 blackcurrant bushes, and each year they would produce so many berries that I would make juice out of them, and that's your medicine. That boosts your immune system ready for, say, the winter months, so that you can fight any pathogens or viruses. So even if you've got a small space, if you were to grow a currant bush or a blueberry, once a year you can have a really incredible harvest. But the beautiful thing about most currant or fruit bushes is most of them take from cutting incredibly easy. So if you take a pencil-sized cutting of a blackcurrant bush and you stick it in a pot, that will probably about 70 or 80% of them will grow. Then you can give that to a friend or family member to inspire them to do some growing. And this, even just growing one plant for food, creates that connection with the natural world, which changes your mindset. And it might be off a bit of a tangent here, but so in the culture we live in today, most people get upset when a famous person they perceive to know dies. Even though they've never met them, they get very upset. Whereas if a native plant around them becomes extinct, they usually don't know. They don't care really if they do know. And so what that means is we are disconnected from the plants and the environment around us. Whereas if you grow, let's say you grew up with an apple tree in your garden and you were super fond of this apple tree and the apples it produced. And when you were in your 30s, apples became extinct. You would care about that. And not only that, but from that experience as a kid, caring about and getting food from that plant, that actually has a huge impact on how you perceive the environment around you and plants. And it makes you care more about the systems we depend on, the natural systems we depend on for our lifeline. So yeah, that in a nutshell, that's why I would recommend someone to grow grow some food in their small space.
Brilliant. All right, Sid. Well, I mean, that is absolutely fantastic. Is there anything you want to end with?
I think one of the things I go by in life is think it, believe it, and it will be. Think something, imagine it, believe in yourself and that thing, and generally it will become the truth.
Nice. Thanks, Sid. That was brilliant. I really, really enjoyed that chat. I think the parallels I felt in the way he's approaching sustainability into garden design and the way I'm approaching it into building is, they're strong parallels. So yes, links to Sid's website and social media are in the show notes. I should also say there's bonus audio on the Patreon, patreon.com/building sustainability. Currently, it stands at 8.5 hours of bonus audio from the interviews so far. Get involved with that. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do share and tag Building Sustainability Podcast or Jeffrey the Natural Builder. As always, thank you very much for listening. And thank you to everyone who gets in touch. I really love hearing from you. Yeah, it's so nice to know that this podcast is making some sort of positive impact. It's a strange thing to just be talking into a microphone and not to real people. So yes, the feedback is greatly received. Thank you. The next episode is coming soon to make up for the one I missed. I think that's all I've got to say. Thank you for listening. Big love to you. See you soon.